This video is about the literal filth of the Wild West, what the ground, water, and air actually contained. We'll get into the rats, sewage, epidemics, and reused bathwater. Subscribe so you don't miss the end of the series about the dirty side of the West. Number 1. Tons of manure every day. Before cars, the entire city moved on hooves. In New York, around 1900, about 150,000 horses were at work, pulling streetcars, milk wagons, fire engines, and taxis. Each animal produced 7 to 14 kilograms of manure a day, plus about 2 liters of urine. Do the math. More than 1,000 tons were hitting the ground every single day. It piled up in the gutters and formed heaps several meters high in vacant lots. In the summer, it dried out, turned to dust, and the wind blew it into people's faces, onto store windows, and onto food sold on the sidewalk. When it rained, it turned into mud and got tracked inside on the soles of people's shoes. And then came the worst part, the flies. Every pile was a breeding ground for larvae, and they carried typhus and childhood diarrhea from street to street. Doctors at the time were already linking manure to the deaths of children during the summer. In 1894, a London newspaper calculated that, at that rate, in 50 years, the streets would be buried under 3 meters of manure, and no city government in the world had any idea how to solve the problem. Number 2. Tobacco spit was everywhere. If you walked into a saloon in 1870, the first thing that caught your attention wasn't the smell of whiskey. It was the floor. Almost every adult man chewed tobacco, and the spit went wherever it could. Bar owners spread sawdust across the floor every day just to soak it up and sweep it out. Train stations were the same. The wood near the benches would turn dark and sticky. Spittoons did exist, brass ones in front of the bar, in courthouses, in hotels, under the seats in train cars. The problem was that nobody could hit them. Charles Dickens visited the United States in 1842 and wrote that Congress in Washington was the worst place he had seen. Stained carpet, dirty walls, men spitting while giving speeches. Women paid the price with their long skirts, which dragged through all of it on the sidewalk. The habit only started to die out when doctors linked spit to tuberculosis. New York passed a law against spitting in public in 1896, and city after city did the same. Number 3. Throwing trash out the window. Imagine opening the window in the morning and throwing everything left over from dinner into the street. Bones, peels, grease, and the contents of the chamber pot. That was how it worked, and there was no garbage truck coming by afterward. The street was the dump. In New York, until the mid-1800s, pigs did that job. Thousands of them roamed freely along Broadway and the Bowery, eating whatever they found in their path. Residents complained about the smell, but nobody wanted to pay for a trash collection system. The pigs worked for free. There was another reason to leave things the way they were. For poor families, that animal meant guaranteed food at the end of the year. When the city tried to round up the pigs, people clashed with police in the streets. The problem is that pigs don't eat everything. What was left rotted by the curb and became food for rats. And where there were too many rats, disease wasn't far behind. Cholera and typhoid fever found the perfect breeding ground there. Things only started to change when epidemics began killing people in wealthy neighborhoods too. That's when garbage became a government issue. Number 4. The outhouse right next to the well. In most 19th century homes, the outhouse sat in the backyard, just a few steps from the well that supplied water for the whole family. Nobody saw a problem with that. They figured the soil would take care of the rest, but it didn't. The waste seeped down through the ground and went straight into the water used for the kettle, breakfast, and the baby's bath. Every sip carried what the family had thrown away the day before. That was how entire cities got sick all at once. Typhoid fever, cholera, dysentery. A family could bury 3 children in a single week and never suspect where it was coming from. The doctor would look at the stagnant air and blame miasma, the foul smell from the swamp. The well, right there, was never suspected. In 1854 in London, a doctor named John Snow removed the handle from a water pump on Broad Street, and the outbreak stopped. It was the first time someone proved, with a map in hand, that water carried the disease. Even then, it took decades for the idea to become standard practice. In the meantime, the outhouse remained right next to the well. Number 5. The cholera that emptied cities. In 1832, a ship arrived in New York, and within a few weeks, the city turned into a ghost town. Anyone with money fled to the countryside. Those who stayed buried their neighbors. Cholera gave no warning. A person could wake up feeling fine, eat lunch like normal, and be dead before dinner. The cause was dehydration. The body lost water so fast that the skin turned bluish and the hands wrinkled like an old man's. Nobody knew why. They blamed bad air, sin, and immigrants. The truth was in the water, wells and rivers contaminated by sewage. In 1849, the disease moved up the Mississippi and hitched a ride on wagons heading to Oregon and California. Along the Platte River, pioneers stopped to dig graves almost every day. It's estimated that cholera killed more people on the trail than any conflict did. That same year, it even killed former President James K. Polk 3 months after he left the White House. It wasn't until 1854 in London that Dr. John Snow proved a water pump was to blame. That was when the world finally saw the enemy. Number 6. The weekly bath, at best. If you think Saturday night was for going out, you'd be wrong. In the 19th century, Saturday night was bath night, and it was the only one of the week. The whole family used the same zinc bathtub placed near the stove. Filling it was a lot of work, bucket after bucket drawn from the well and heated over a wood fire, almost an hour of work. That's why nobody wasted it. The father went first, then the mother, then the children by age. The last child got dark, lukewarm water full of lye soap. They say that's where the expression about throwing the baby out with the bathwater came from. In cities, commercial bathhouses did the same thing. Heating water was expensive, so the owner sold the same tub to 3, 4, 5 customers in a row. Whoever paid less went in last. And there's more. Doctors at the time warned that bathing too much opened the pores and let disease in. In other words, washing less wasn't neglect. It was medical advice. Number 7. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs. In the 19th century, when someone stopped at a roadside inn, they didn't pay for a room. They paid for a spot in a bed, and that bed was already occupied. 2 or 3 strangers shared the same straw mattress, boots on the floor, hats on the wall. What nobody told you was that the mattress came with residents. Bedbugs hid in the seams and cracks in the wood during the day and came out at night. In the morning, the traveler woke up with rows of bites on his neck and arms. Fleas came from dogs and horses, but lice were the worst of them all. Civil War soldiers gave them a nickname, graybacks. No rank was spared. At night, the men sat by the fire, turned their shirts inside out, and ran the seams through the flame to pop the eggs. They called it a skirmish. The problem wasn't the itching. Lice carry typhus. In crowded camps and inns, the fever spread from bed to bed, and nobody understood why. It wasn't until 1909 that a doctor proved the louse was to blame. Number 8. The toothbrush nobody had. Today you brush your teeth twice a day without even thinking about it. In the 19th century, that wasn't a thing for most people. A toothbrush with hog bristles was an expensive imported item, something for wealthy people in big cities. In the countryside and towns out west, it was normal to scrub your teeth with salt, soot, or a twig chewed at the end, if anyone even bothered. The results showed up early. By age 40, It was common for a man to have already lost half his teeth. An infected tooth had no treatment. It got pulled, and the person pulling it was the barber. That's right. The same guy who cut your hair and shaved your face, pulled teeth with pliers, bled sick people and stitched up wounds. That red and white striped pole outside the barber shop? The red represents blood. Anesthesia was a shot of whiskey and two men holding your shoulders down. No x-rays, no way to sterilize the metal tools. A tooth infection started in the mouth and ended in the cemetery. It killed more people out west than gunfights did. Number 9. The wooden town that went up in flames. In the Wild West, an entire town could be built out of pine boards, one building right up against the next, with no space between them. Light came from kerosene lamps, and behind the bar, whiskey caught fire like gasoline. All it took was one lamp falling onto the saloon floor for the whole block to be burning within an hour. There were no fire hydrants or paid firefighters. Men formed bucket lines to the nearest well and hoped the wind would change direction. Seattle lost its downtown in 1889 after a pot of glue boiled over in a woodworking shop. Deadwood burned in 1879. Dodge City went up in flames twice in the 1880s. In Chicago, in 1871, the fire burned for 2 days and left 100,000 people homeless. And there's one part almost nobody talks about. The next week, a lot of people were already rebuilding in the same place, with the same wood. It was only after burning down 2 or 3 times that these towns replaced wood with brick. And that's how, through costly mistakes, the country learned how to build. Number 10. Dangerous milk and meat. Think of a time when a glass of milk could kill a child. Before refrigerators, sitting down at the table was a real risk. Meat hung in butcher shops in the heat of the day, and the only ways to save what they could were salt, smoking, or preserving it in alcohol. If it already smelled bad, they would just season it more heavily and serve it anyway. But the worst of it was the milk. In big cities like New York, cows were kept penned up next to distilleries and fed the hot leftover mash from whiskey production. The animals got sick, lost their teeth, and many could no longer even stand up. The milk they produced was thin and bluish, nicknamed swill milk. To cover it up, milkmen mixed in plaster, flour, eggs, and molasses. In 1858, a report in Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper published drawings of those cow pens, and the city came face to face with the scale of the damage. It was estimated that thousands of babies died every year in New York because of that milk. That scandal paved the way for the first food inspection laws in the United States. Number 11. The dust that made people sick. Before paved roads, almost every American street was packed dirt, and horses traveled those streets. In New York alone, there were more than 100,000 animals. Each one left behind about 10 kilograms of manure every day. Nobody could keep up with cleaning all of it. The manure dried in the sun, was crushed by wagon wheels, and turned into fine dust. In the summer, the wind kicked that dust up into clouds that blew through open windows. It covered clothes hanging on the line, the dinner table, and bread at the bakery. People breathed it in all day without knowing what they were inhaling. In the winter, rain turned the same street into a mud pit that stuck to boots and got tracked into the house. Doctors at the time started connecting the dots: tuberculosis, tetanus, and respiratory infections that wouldn't let up. Dried manure carried spores and bacteria straight into people's lungs and onto their plates. Children played on that ground every day. The clean city we imagine when we look at old photographs never existed. What those pictures left out was exactly what was killing people. Number 12. The doctor who made things worse. In the Wild West, calling the doctor could be worse than not calling one at all. Many frontier doctors had never set foot in a medical school. They bought their diplomas through the mail or learned by watching someone else work. In their medical bag were calomel, which is pure mercury, and opium. The mercury made patients drool non-stop and lose their teeth. The opium took away the pain and left addiction in its place. Bloodletting was still routine back then. They believed the fever was in the blood, so they opened the vein of someone who was already too weak to fight back. Surgery was the worst part. Nobody had heard of germs. The same saw went from one man to the next, and a dirty apron was a source of pride, a sign of experience. When there was no table, the saloon counter did the job. Whiskey instead of anesthesia, and sawdust on the floor for the blood. That's why so many wounded men arrived alive and died later. The bullet opened the way, but the infection was what killed them 3 or 4 days later, far from the gunfight that became a legend. Number 13, the drunk who froze to death. In the American winter of the late 19th century, the cold killed more people than any bar fight. In Chicago, New York, and Minneapolis, a man would leave the saloon around midnight, feel his face getting warm, open his coat, and say he was fine. That warmth was a lie. Alcohol dilates the blood vessels near the skin, so a person feels warm while the body loses heat fast. Anyone who fell down in an alley didn't wake up. In the morning, the ice delivery man or patrolman would find the body leaning against a wall, covered in snow. The coroner always wrote the same thing: death from exposure. Newspapers printed 2 lines in the middle of the ads, with no name at all, just "Man found dead in the street." Nobody was surprised. During the cold wave of February 1899, temperatures across the Midwest dropped below 20 degrees below zero, and the number of people dying in the streets jumped. Police stations kept their basements open for people who had nowhere to sleep, and even then there wasn't enough room. In those cities, winter collected its toll from anyone who drank too much and ended up alone on the sidewalk.